One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Oh, that looks beautiful.
Hi, I'm Zaria Jenkins.
And I'm Amanda Johnson, and today we're going to be talking about
Racing. Haley, not that kind of racing. Thank you. Today we're going to be talking about the competition between the US and the USSR to maintain their achievements and to claim the title of superiority. Whew!
the Cold War began in the 1950s and was between the US powers in the West and the Communist Party in the East. The passive-aggressive mentalities between the two quickly escalated into who could do the coolest thing first, and then boom, space race.
And you know what they say, it doesn't matter who gets there, only who gets there first. Just ask Mark Zuckerberg.
On October 4th, 1957, Soviet R-7 launched Sputnik, the first artificial satellite and man-made object to orbit the Earth. 1 point USR. Major newspapers read headlines on Sputnik that included articles addressing the Red Conquest and why are we lagging. Many Americans were alarmed that the Soviets had beaten them. And then the Soviets struck another blow on November 3rd with the release of Sputnik 2, this time carrying a little mongrel terrier named Laika. Aw, how adorable. I love puppies. Don't you love puppies? Wait, what was I saying? Right, Soviets 2, US 0. 8 additional Sputnik satellites were launched with animals on board as the Soviets perfected their spacecraft light support. Soviet Premier Khrushchev fueled US concerns by alleging that Soviet long-range missiles were rolling off the assembly lines like sausages. While these claims were false, Americans believed them and worried about the perceived missile gap between the Soviet Union and the US. Oh, Miss Schaefer! Didn't the US release one as well that was even better made? Shouldn't they get a point? Thank you for caring about us Americans over here, me from the past. The US did release their version of a satellite called Vanguard EV-3. Unfortunately, this was a colossal failure, deeming the name Flopnik. Don't worry, you gun-toted, flag-waving, red-blooded Americans, though. The US did find success. Under the command of lead rocket scientist Wernher von Braun, the US released a much-improved version. Explorer 1 was launched on January 31st, and it even had the edge on Sputnik by finding the magnetic radiation belts around the Earth. So, kudos to you, US. Brownie points.
In the summer of '58, President Eisenhower signed a public order to create the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, a federal agency dedicated to space exploration. Not long after, the Soviet space program took another step forward with the launch of Luna 1, the first man-made object to orbit the Sun. The US chose Mercury 7, and the Soviet Union sent Luna 2 up into the sky. It became the first space probe to hit the moon.
From there, things only got better for the Soviets' ego. In April 1961, the Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first person to orbit Earth, traveling in the capsule-like spacecraft Vostok 1.
You can imagine what it must have been like for the US, as their attempts continually were falling flat, and oftentimes literally.
But they never gave up. Eventually, NASA began working on Project Mercury, which had very specific purposes: orbit a manned spacecraft around Earth, investigate man's ability to function in space, and recover both man and spacecraft safely. To accomplish this, engineers designed a smaller, cone-shaped capsule that was far lighter than the Soviets' Vostok. They tested the craft with chimpanzees and held a final test flight in March 1961. The Soviets rebutted with Gagarin's launch.
Whoa. When will it end? Let's go to Haley with the scores.
We're getting pretty beat, I'll tell you what. At this point in time, the USSR is killing us with their quick explorations with the whooping point of 6 points. The US has a baby number of 2 points. Alright, back to you guys in the studio.
May 5th came around, and the Americans celebrated a small victory when Alan Shepard became the first American in space.
It seemed like the US had turned a new leaf. The Gemini program was launched. L. Gordon Cooper became the last man to orbit space alone in 1963. Then Project Apollo was announced. This new burst of energy and determination carried on through December of 1968, when the US launched Apollo 8, the first manned space mission to orbit the moon.
Images of the lunar surface were transmitted for live television broadcast on Earth. This nearly flawless mission was completed on the morning of December 27th, when splashdown occurred in the Pacific Ocean after an elapsed time of 147 hours.
In 1963, the USSR put up a good fight when they reached gender equality by launching Valentina Tereshkova into orbit. She was the first woman in space. Add Lunar 9 being first to softly land on the moon, and you've got the USSR still edging out Americans. US's Soft Landing Surveyor 1 was then launched 4 months later.
In January of 1967, the U.S. faced tragedy when Apollo 11 struck fire and killed 3. The USSR suffered a loss of cosmonaut Vladimir Komarov as well, when his Soyuz S-1 parachute failed to open correctly. The U.S. seemed silent in discoveries for a while they gathered and trained their Apollo 11 team. The USSR during this time launched Zond 5 that carried 2 turtles in 1968. You'd think they shoot for people, not go back for animals. We'll give them a half a point for creativity but lack of movement. Haley, where do we stand with the scores?
At the moment, after subtracting failures and successes, we stood with USSR towering over the US with 7.5 versus 4. It didn't really matter at this point, though. It was all or nothing. Who could reach the moon first? Everyone was all in, and the stakes were high.
All of the waiting and excitement and anxiety led up to July 16, 1969, a day that would live in the minds of Americans for centuries. On this day, U.S. astronauts Neil Armstrong, Edwin "Buzz" Aldrin, and Michael Collins set off on the Apollo 11 space mission, the first lunar landing attempt. After landing successfully on July 20th, Armstrong became the first man to walk on the moon's surface. What magnified this accomplishment was the media and its ability to get everyone involved. Kids, parents, teachers, criminals, barbers, they were all tuned into the brand new color TV to watch this monumental event. The new inventions and achievements sparked hope and pride in the hearts of Americans. The U.S. flag was planted on the moon's surface, not just as a prod of the Soviets, but also as a sign as to how far the U.S. had come. Game, set, match.
And now time for the open letter. Dear Edwin Eugene Aldrin Jr., a.k.a. Buzz Aldrin, a.k.a. the other guy. You were the second person on the moon, for crying out loud. We're sorry that Neil got out of the spotlight. You did so much more than people realize. You did a 5-hour spacewalk back in '68 with Gemini 12. You served as the lunar module pilot for Apollo 11, which not many people know about, but you immensely helped us land on the moon safely. 600 million people watched you on the moon. Yes, watched you. It was the largest television audience in history. When you returned home, you were prized with the Presidential Medal of Freedom, followed by a 45-day goodwill tour that went all over the world. You have your own star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. And yes, you had some dark times struggling with depression and alcoholism, post-NASA times, but you made a complete 180. You were on Dancing with the Stars back in 2010. You collaborated with Snoop Dogg and wrote Rocket Experience. Buzz, you kinda rock. Thanks for being an inspiration to all of us with your spectacular accomplishments. I hope in the future you are more widely recognized for all the amazing things you've done. To infinity and beyond is where you'll go, my brother. Peace, love, and the moon, from your favorites here at Crash Course.
Don't think there's still bad blood, though. In 1975, a joint Apollo-Soyuz mission sent 3 U.S. astronauts with Soviet astronauts. The commanders had a handshake in space, and it symbolized us moving forward and growing more beneficial U.S.-Soviet relations.
Being space race lovers, we wanted to write some thank you notes to our fellow racers. Mind if we do that? Awesome. Thank you, Laika, for proving that dogs can do things that people think are too much work. Thank you, Michael Collins, for being the man that almost no one remembers from Apollo 11. Thank you, Vanguard, for proving that all hard work doesn't pay off in the end. Thank you, Apollo 12, for being the butt of the space race after Apollo 11. Thank you, Alan Bean, for proving that intelligent pilots can be stupid as to burn an expensive TV camera in the sun. Thank you, NASA, for spending millions of dollars on the astronaut pen to write in the zero-gravity confines of the space capsules. The Soviet Union solved the same problem with just a pencil.
Thank you guys for watching.
Live long and prosper.
Have a nice day.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade